Welcome back to the YouTube channel of Ye Oldie Parish Church, to one of our little videos introducing and explaining some of the liturgy, which is the way we worship at All Saints, what it looks like and why we do it. And in particular, at this time of year, I'm doing a few little videos to introduce the liturgy of Holy Week, both what it might look like at a variety of churches, but also what does it actually look like here at All Saints. So I did a video a couple of days ago about Maundy Thursday, which you can check out also on our YouTube channel, and it's referenced in other places on our website, that just introduces the idea of what happens in Holy Week. But for this video, I want to introduce you to Good Friday. So I'm kind of assuming if you're watching this, you know a little bit about the story of Good Friday. So it is the day when we remember and we think about the crucifixion of Jesus. So at All Saints, we probably don't follow the most tradition of the liturgy, but I think in some ways there's probably the most variety about how people do Good Friday across the church. But there are some core elements, and I want to sort of highlight to those to you before I introduce my guest, because I do have a guest today as well, who will be revealed shortly. So the core elements of Good Friday, obviously and most clearly, it's about the cross. So however churches do it, there is a sense and an invitation to be present to the cross, and to be present to the cross in a way that doesn't hurry forwards, right? That doesn't kind of go, oh yeah, we know the bad stuff happens, but hey, resurrection's coming. So it's just that sense of, no, let's just stop. Let's sit with the cross and embrace the horror of what the cross really means. So we've been exploring that a little bit of our Holy Week reflections this week, but just to think about how it works in empire, how it's an act of violence, an act of betrayal, and ultimately how it is God's self being abandoned, and that, you know, that heart-rending cry from Jesus, my God, why have you forsaken me? So we allow ourselves to be in that place at the cross. So one of the ways that we do that at All Saints, you may have seen, if you worship with us regularly, that throughout Lent, a big wooden cross appears at the front of church, and that's been draped with a purple cloth. And then on Palm Sunday, the purple cloth was torn down as part of the Passion reading, and the very simple bare cross sort of takes centre stage. But Good Friday, as I've said in a previous video, is part 2 of a 3-part liturgy during Holy Week, and it follows on from the night before. And the night before at Maundy Thursday, as we end that service, we end by stripping the church of all its furnishings, not the furniture. We don't remove the pews. That's a video for another day and a different conversation. But we strip the church of all its beauty and finery, really. So when you come into church on Good Friday, what you'll see is a completely bare altar. You know, no altar cloths, no colour, and again a bare and stripped down cross. So it's all about that focus. In some traditions of the church, you might actually walk up and kiss the foot, and you might sort of venerate the cross. We don't tend to do that in our tradition, but this whole thing, you get it, you know, it's about the cross and just sitting with it physically, visually, in the space. So the other core element that kind of wraps around that is silence. Now, I do talk a lot, but believe it or not, I do really like silence. And I think silence is really important in our spiritual lives and in the life of the church too, because often we get in the way sometimes of God, and often words, they aren't enough, are they? I mean, how do you articulate what's going on Good Friday? So silence is really important. And again, that follows directly on from the previous night. So when we leave Maundy Thursday liturgy, we leave in silence. We receive communion in silence. It's a very, very different feel. So it's an extended silence. And what we try and do at All Saints is kind of make space for people to come and sit silently before the cross. And over the last few years, we've tried to hold that kind of 3-hour period, 12 till 3, which again is a bit of a tradition around the 3 hours of Jesus, you know, hanging on the cross, or at the 3rd hour is when he dies. So remember, Holy Week liturgy, it's not trying to do like an historical reenactment, because that would just be, that would be silly. That wouldn't really be helpful. But it is using liturgy, drama, music, silence, etc., to enter into the spirit, if you like, of what's happening. So this year we will be open from 12 again, but in actual fact, we're going to follow the tradition that we've actually been following all of Lent on Saturday evenings, but we're going to bring it into Good Friday. And that's an invitation to walk the Stations of the Cross, which Marek Wisnarski will be leading, one of our church wardens. So the Stations of the Cross, again, it's an invitation to physically and sometimes through movement, but certainly through images, to walk with Jesus through that last stage of going to the cross. It comes from, in the early part of the church, sort of pilgrimages to Jerusalem and pilgrims wanting to physically walk in the steps of Jesus. And then it kind of becomes something that people do back in their home churches. And there are various traditions connected to it, which again, I could probably do a whole other video about Stations of the Cross, but we will do that at 12 o'clock on this Good Friday, using, again, words, silence, and actually I think we're going to move around the church this time with some pictures of all of those stations as we contemplate the cross. But as that finishes, that'll probably last about half an hour, we move into a time of just silence, and people are welcome to come sit in the church, stay for the whole time, go away, come back, and so on, just focusing silence around the cross. But at 2 o'clock, we will bring all of this sort of silent meditation and prayer together with a more formal service. And we have a service of meditation at the cross that uses music, organ music, uses poetry, and uses the third part of the Good Friday liturgy, which is the hearing of the Passion from John's Gospel. So if you were with us on Palm Sunday, you'll know that we heard, this year it was from Matthew's Gospel, but the tradition is on Palm Sunday, you hear one of the Synoptic Gospels, and on Good Friday, you would generally hear the same story, but through the lens of John and John's Gospel. So that's kind of the 2 to 3 hour service. But I'm delighted that today, to help me do this video, I am joined by the person who put this service together. And through the wonder of the Zoom button, I'm going to press gallery and introduce you to Simon Headley. So Simon is our principal organist and currently has the title of interim choral director, although the interim is being a rather longer im. And I'm really mindful, when I was growing up, we had a choir director who retired from the choir, being the temporary choir master after 30 years. So I'm just sort of saying that. But this particular service is something that Simon's been putting together for us for the last few years. And I thought it'd be great to hear from Simon directly about, where did this service come from, Simon? How did you dream it up? Where did it come from? And why have you put it together for us?
Hi, Wendy. Thank you for asking me to say a few bits about this. The genesis of this whole idea came into being in 2011, actually, when I was at the cathedral. And at the time, I felt that there's a massive amount of organ music available for this period, pieces that I played and pieces that I wanted to learn and that just didn't get any exposure. And so with the David Monteith, who was at that time was Canon Chancellor, we came up with the idea of on the Monday of Holy Week, putting together a program of half an hour's worth of organ music, readings and poems. And that's where it all started. And when you're doing it at the beginning of Holy Week, there's the chance to have a sort of different sort of journey to the one that you would need on Good Friday. So just looking back at the one that we did back in 2011, we started at the beginning with the original sin and Adam, and then anticipation of a saviour, obviously Advent, and then upon entering the world, the saviour accepts suffering, and all of these had an organ piece linked to them. Then we had the sin of mankind, and then sort of finished with the saviour on the cross. So we did this little journey, and gradually over the years, this sort of a theme, it became quite a thing on the Monday of Holy Week, which was only, I think this year is the only time that the cathedral hasn't actually done that, partly because of the building being closed. And so the themes gradually evolved over the years, and sometimes there was a specific theme, that had overarching theme for the season that had then informed what went into the meditation. And obviously as time went on, sometimes the format changed slightly, so we might have more readings, but generally there was always readings and and poetry. And then we started to do something similar over the in the lead up to Christmas on the Mondays of Advent. Obviously, then when I left the cathedral, I came and played for you at All Saints, and then this seemed to be an obvious thing. Emma, who was director of mission through music at the time, knew of my Monday meditations, and so they got introduced to All Saints with a slight variation on it. I think the first one that we did was one that I'd done earlier called Personalities of the Passion, and that reflected on the different people within the story, and there was a poem, and again in this instance there was one piece of music, a series of variations on a choral. There's just so much material available that you've got lots to choose from. There's lots of wonderful poetry and that can take you to different places along the way. So that's the broad that's where it came from. And actually, funnily enough, the first service that I ever played for as an organist, aged about 14 or 15, was a 2:00 Good Friday service, and that comprised 3 20-minute sections. Each had a hymn, a reading, and there was an organ piece in each. So there were 3 organ solos, if you effectively, to be played. And in a sense, I thought nothing of it at the time, but actually coming around to doing it then on Good Friday, All Saints, felt like a sort of completion of this circle of where I'd started.
That is so lovely to hear, and I didn't know that. That's really beautiful. I want to come back to the detail of our one this year in a moment, so people have an idea of what they might be coming to in the ingredients. But I wonder if I might ask you now, Simon. Obviously, you know, you're a musician, a highly accomplished musician. If you've never heard Simon play the organ, then you just come to church and hear him play. But for you, in your Christian faith, in your spirituality and walk with God, can you just, clearly music's important to you, but can you articulate a bit about why or what it feels like when you're playing the organ? How does this work for you as a Christian?
I think there's music can take you to a different place, and it can set atmosphere, and sometimes just the very way some of the chords and things in pieces can really speak to you of a bigger, of something that's bigger than just you, and there's so much beauty in the music as well, and I think that says so much of God and what is possible out there, and yeah, just takes you from sometimes the narrow confines of your own life, really.
Yeah. Thank you. And certainly I'm aware of just how it can really speak into the emotions of an occasion. And we had a very powerful experience of that on Palm Sunday this year, when Kate Burns, who's also involved in our music and is our interim music coordinator, working with our contemporary musicians, offered up Spiegel im Spiegel by Arvo Pärt. And it spoke after the Passion in a way that, well, certainly a sermon wasn't going to do, quite frankly. So music can do that, can't it? Can you?
And in the sense that you know when it's right, but equally you know when it's wrong, because the wrong thing at the wrong time jars into that. And I grew up in a church where I took it for granted that the organist would, if the hymn wasn't long enough, he improvised, and it was all part and parcel. It was just an ordinary parish church, but it was all part and parcel of what happened, and it's kind of second nature, this marrying of music to an occasion. Also, when I was about 18, we had a very musical vicar who'd been presenter at St David's Cathedral, and he loved these sort of putting together these sort of services that of readings, music, and so it was something that I've known for a long time, and have always wanted to. I now have the opportunity to shape those services, my input to them, and I find the process of it interesting, and discovering the poems or and the pieces, and trying to get the whole thing to marry together. And sometimes you end up down a road that you didn't always think you were going to travel along. So I enjoyed the creativity of it.
We're really grateful that we are on the receiving end of some of that creativity. So could you tell us a little bit about particularly the service that we're going to have this year? So as I said earlier to everyone, there's obviously the organ pieces, there's the sections of John's Gospels, takes you the Passion, and some poetry. So just give us a sense of how does the thing fit together, and perhaps a little bit about why you've chosen what you've chosen. Perhaps pick out a couple of particular highlights that you'd want us to pay attention to.
So the format of this year's one, we've now introduced, now that we've come out of COVID and all the restrictions, that because obviously that shaped the ones that we did in 2020 and 2021. We've now put hymns into this hour, and so some of the organ pieces lead directly into those hymns. They are preludes on the actual tunes that we are about to sing. And so there's a natural link there with them as well. The other feature this year, as last year, I've used some pieces by Ethel Smythe, who is a female composer, obviously, but an overlooked female composer from these pieces were written about 1913. So at that time, somebody operating very much in a man's world. And possibly overlooked as a result of that, despite the compositions being worthy. I mean, she was involved with the suffragette movement, and she wrote March of the Women. And so the program also links some of the influences on her of Brahms. Interestingly enough, Parry published a similar set of chorale preludes at a not dissimilar time, so one of his is featured as well. But also this time I've included some works by Bach, and again some of Smythe's compositional methods are looking backwards to that sort of heritage there as well. As I've said, the problem is there's too much music, and sometimes the problem can be you're like a child in a sweet shop, really. There's almost too much choice, and it's narrowing it down into something that is going to fit the hour. I think probably one could go on for 3 hours actually, but that might not be what everybody else wants. And so it's finding your thread, and sometimes that thread is better some years than others. But I think that there is something that links all of the pieces together there, and having with the church's ethos of being an inclusive church, this felt like a good fit. And there's quite a lot over the last few years with say people like Anna Lapwood. There is a greater emergence of saying, actually, there's quite a lot of women, music by female composers being championed by women as well. And Anna Lapwood, have I got it to hand?
Ooh, a visual aid.
She brought out this collection, Gregoriana, and that has got all the contents are by there are new compositions by female composers. That's
wonderful. And just as an aside, well, or not an aside, as really relevant, of course, the whole thing of the cross is who is left at the cross. It's the women. So actually, so it's lovely that you pay attention to that too in the way you're choosing music and bringing that into our liturgy. So we've got the big organ pieces, preludes that lead into some of the hymns, and those kind of things. But then you also you haven't just gone for just the Bible readings from John. Talk to us a little bit about the poetry that you've chosen and why and how that fits in.
Yeah, in the same way that the organ pieces are a commentary, if you like, on the text of the gospel that's gone before. So are the poems. Sometimes in these meditations, the poems help move the story on. So not so much this time, but I've omitted bits of the religious the actual gospel text and popped a poem in that says the same thing, but in a different way, and helps move the story on. And sometimes they're reflections. I'm just looking at the poems that we've got. On the wrong page. So it's done by Malcolm Guite, who's again a contemporary poet, and one of his, the whole round world, in Greek, the total cosmos, is all encompassed in this loving word, not just the righteous, right on and religious, but every one of whom you ever heard. So there's those reflections. There's one called Fire and Ice. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. So there's different perspectives there. The Rood Tree by Anne Lewin. I might have been his cradle, rocking him, folding securely against harm. I could have been a ship. So all of that's then, we're thinking about the wood of the cross and what that
and inviting us to use our imaginations. And I think that's what I really like about the way you put this together, Simon, because if Holy Week is about anything, it's about inviting us to imagine ourselves into the story. And all of these elements, they make space for us to do that, don't they? By kind of opening up different threads in our minds and our mind's eye. As we the liturgy is very different to any others that is a communion, because it's not. So the big thing about Good Friday is there's not a communion service. However, we do receive communion from the reserved sacrament. So again, this service flows from the night before, and at the end of Maundy Thursday, we take the sacrament to, in our church, is sort of the high altar, but a garden of repose. So the service ends with an opportunity to receive the sacrament, but again in silence, and it's very, very different to how we would sort of celebrate the Eucharist on different occasions. And I think there's is there a particular piece of music that we're going to sing, or we're going to listen to a piece of music while that happens, a contemporary hymn, I think, aren't we? When I say contemporary, it's probably the 1980s, but that's
it's called a Purple Robe,
and that will be sung for us. And then we're going to use one of the Taizé chants. And Taizé music is, I suppose, it works again by creating space because it's repetitive. So you don't have to think about it, but as you sing, as you chant, the meaning of it kind of sinks into you. And that's sort of where we leave it. And of course, we end with silence. Now, we're used to, Simon, at the end of our services, of you playing a huge organ voluntary. And we should give a shout out really to our other regular visiting organist, Chris Hill, who also brings his real gifts both to the organ and to accompanying different musicians. Now, you do love an organ voluntary, don't you, Simon? I mean, is this where organists really get to just let rip? Is that what it's about?
Again, I go back to what I said earlier. I do try, and I think you've got to pick the right. You do have to pick the right piece for the right occasion. And part and parcel of that is reflecting the mood of the picking the right mood for the service. So, for example, during Lent, I've been playing pieces. I've not been playing fairground music, as some people refer to one particular piece, but I've been playing pieces in minor keys. So that have that sadder air to them, and quite often I'll make a particular point of playing only preludes and fugues or whatever fantasies by Bach during that season, to kind of mark that out as well. But then, as you mentioned, Good Friday, no organ voluntary. But then, as we move on to the Easter Vigil, we have pieces in a major key, and the music for Easter Day will be of a celebratory nature as well. It can be. I think sometimes it can be. You don't always know what mood people are in when they arrive or leave church, and I mean sometimes you can get it. You might be playing a happy piece when that's the very last thing that is not where somebody is, and you can't mitigate for all of those circumstances. But as far as is possible, you try and relate what you're playing to the general theme of the service. Sometimes that can be quite specific. It might be, I don't know, the last hymn might have been "Now Thank We All Our God" or something like that. And then there's a piece that is a postlude on that very tune. So the two things go together very well. But it was interesting immediately post-COVID, when we were back in, when we were able to worship back in church, I made a particular point of actually playing things that were always, or to my opinion, uplifting, because people, the feeling I got was people were glad to be back, and actually the last thing that they needed a lift, and so the last thing that they wanted really was me playing, a miserable piece of music that I might really, I might really love. Oh, this is a great piece of music, but actually it was the wrong mood for where people were. So
Thank you. And I think you've set the scene for our next video, which we will also need to record, about Easter music and how music will play its part in that great joyous season of Easter. So thank you for sharing with us today. I want to wrap up this little video by encouraging everyone to think about Good Friday, whether you're able to come on to All Saints or perhaps you're in another town or place. Find some way to be present to the cross, to not hurry through to resurrection, to when those gorgeous organ voluntaries will be coming back again, but to sit with the silence and all that the cross is. We look forward to being with you as we journey together, and our huge thanks to Simon and all our musicians who contribute so much to our liturgy in the life of